Growing up, my favorite thing in the world was going fishing with my two older brothers. We lived in a very rural area and would often hike out into the woods to go to various creeks to go fishing. We never really caught anything big in the creeks, but it wasn't as much about what we caught as much as it was about spending time with your brothers fishing. Stereotypically, we always got up way early in the morning on fishing day. We would begin hiking out to whichever creek we were going to and would watch the sun as it stole across the sky. It would be fully light outside as we got to where we were headed to. The scariest thing to ever happen on a fishing trip, of course, happened the first time that we had gotten to a new creek. We had set out that morning, determined to go further into the hills than we normally did. We passed by one or two of our regular fishing spots and kept going deeper and deeper into the woods. We found an absolutely amazing spot. It was thickly wooded, but the creek was huge. It was beautiful and even had a fallen tree stretched out over it. After we determined that it was sturdy enough, the three of us made our way over to the other side of the creek. We sat our stuff out and began to fish. The day wore on, and we weren't really catching anything. The fishing got boring after a bit, so we decided to do something we normally didn't do. Like I said, the creek was huge and it was quite deep too, so we decided to put aside our fishing poles and go swimming in the creek. I really don't know how long we had been swimming when I noticed that our middle brother stopped doing anything and began staring off in the woods. Our oldest brother asked him what was wrong, and he just motioned to the woods. "There's someone out in the woods, watching us," he said. My first thought was that some pervert was out there watching us, but when I followed my brother's finger pointing out towards the woods, those thoughts quickly evaporated. Standing off in the trees was a huge man. It wasn't too dark that we couldn't make out some of his features. He was wearing jeans and a flannel shirt, which struck me as odd as it was pretty warm out. He had a baseball cap on his head that was sitting low over his face. But the most striking feature he had was that he was holding what looked to be a rifle or shotgun in his hand. We weren't sure what to do. Going into the woods, we knew that we were trespassing. We never actually knew whose property we were on, but we did know that the places that we hiked and fished on didn't belong to us. Except up until this point, we had never gotten caught before. Both of us younger boys looked at our brother for instruction as to what to do. He seemed just as worried as we did, though, and didn't give us any direction. He just kept looking at the man standing there and watched. My brother suggested we try and get ourselves over to our stuff, take it, and leave. However, this was daunting because that was the side of the creek the guy was on. We slowly made our way over to our things. However, before we got to shore, an old hag came running out of the woods, shrieking like a freaking banshee. I got startled and fell back into the water, struggling until my middle brother pulled me back up again. The old nasty woman actually ran over to our things, our poles, and our clothes. She started grabbing the things and screaming, "Mine, mine, mine, mine!" She was gathering all of our things in her arms, dropping a few of them when she had too much in her arms. "Yay, stop that!" my oldest brother yelled, and began to try and move faster to the shore. My middle brother reached out and put his hand on his shoulder and pointed back to the big guy in the woods. When we moved back towards the shore, he began moving closer, and he held the gun up as he walked. "Holy shit!" I distinctly remember yelling. "We're sorry we trespassed on your property. my middle brother shouted, but they didn't pay any attention to us.
"He's not gonna shoot us,"
my oldest brother said, and began moving towards the old hag to get his things. As he did, though, the old woman saw him, and she took a fillet knife out of her pocket and started waving it at my brother.
"I'll cut you,"
she screamed at him, her arms still overflowing with our things. By now the big hillbilly was by the shore of the creek, and he had the shotgun cocked and was pointing it at my oldest brother. He, of course, stopped in his tracks. It was a tense moment as we stood cold in the water with this guy pointing his gun right in our faces. Once the woman had gathered up our clothes and fishing gear in her hands, the guy said one thing to us.
"Get."
We didn't have to be told twice. All three of us swam to the other side of the creek, got out of the water, and got out of there. It sucks because we had to walk through the woods in nothing but soaked shorts. We didn't even have shoes, and the twigs and rocks and leaves hurt our feet. But we were too scared to even consider going back. We fortunately did not get chewed out for losing our stuff. Our dad told us that there are some messed up people out in the woods, and we had to be careful. It was a long time, though, before we were brave enough to go fishing again.
Growing up, my fraternal twin brother and I shared a room. I think both of us would have preferred to have our own room, but our dad used our extra room for a study. He was a lawyer and needed it as his office at home, I suppose. Anyhow, I slept on the top bunk, and my brother slept on the bottom bunk. The worst thing about sleeping on the top bunk is that I tend to have to get up several times a night to go to the bathroom. I guess I must have a small bladder or something. I also drink a lot of pop, which probably has a lot more to do with it. Or it might have had something to do with the fact that my brother tosses and turns all night, and it wakes me up over and over again. One night when I was 15, when I went to bed, I noticed that my brother had already gone to bed. I had originally intended to stay up and read in bed for a while, but couldn't turn my light on if my brother was asleep. Instead, I took my Android up on the top bunk with me and decided to play some games on my Nintendo emulator app. I played an old Dragon Warrior game with the sound off. Right on cue, no less than an hour after I got into bed, my bladder started telling me that I had to get up. So, trying to be as quiet as I possibly could, I put my phone down and got up and went to the bathroom. I did my thing, and then I came back into the room. When I opened the door, the light shone in my room for a second, and it must have bugged my brother a little bit because he grumbled something, flopped over, and was quiet again. I quietly apologized, but he didn't reply. Trying my best to not wake my brother up again, I climbed up the ladder, back onto the top bunk. I noticed when I got up there that my cell phone light was blinking green, which indicated that someone had sent me a text message. I picked up the phone, wondering who would be sending me a text that time of night. When I tapped the screen, my blood froze in my veins as I read a text from my twin brother that simply asked, "Hey bro, I'm gonna be out late with my girlfriend. Can you cover for me?" At first I thought it was a joke. My brother could have sent the text to me from the lower bunk when I was using the bathroom. It was the sort of thing that he may have done. I slowly texted him back. I thought that if he responded, I'd be able to see the reflection of the light on the wall from his cell phone. I asked him if he was joking, Immediately, he texted back and said, "No, why would you think I was joking?" I didn't see any light. I answered and said that I just saw him sleeping in the bunk below me and that I didn't find this funny at all. The text back from Ian was almost immediate. He told me that it was definitely not him in the lower bunk, and if I was not joking, I had better get out of that room immediately. Scared half to death, I grabbed my phone, skipped the ladder, and jumped off the bed and ran for the door. Despite what might have been better judgment, when I opened the door, I had to look back and see who was sleeping in my bed. Part of me still suspected it was Ian playing a joke on me. However, when the light shone on the bed, it was empty. No one was there. Freaked out and confused, I turned the light on. No one was in the bed. I crept slowly over to the bed and looked under it, half expecting to see a face looking back at me. No one was there. I looked in the closet. No one was there. I guess the fact that there was no one there should have made me not scared, but it was scarier. I ran out the door and went to my parents and explained what had happened. I hated to throw Ian under the bus like that, but if there was an intruder in the house, I thought finding that person was more important. My parents and I searched the entire house, but we didn't find anyone or any indication that anybody had broken into the house. I wasn't able to go back to bed until Ian got home. It was just way too creepy. I never knew what I saw in the bottom bunk that night. All I know is there was definitely someone there.
It's taken me a long time to tell this story. I'm 27 years old now, and this happened to me when I was 14. My name is Adam, and I have one older brother named Seth. I haven't seen Seth in 13 years. I have no idea where he is, or even if he's still alive, but I do know why he left. Seth was 2 years older than me, and we were very close. Although all brothers tend to get into scuffles with each other, with Seth and I, they were few and far between. For the most part, he and I did everything together. He taught me how to fish. He let me play football and baseball with him and his older friends. Although Seth was bigger and stronger than I was, he always sold me to other people like I was superior to him. He told people I was smarter than him. He told them I was the talented brother who was going to be so much more successful than anyone could dream of. I really loved him, and he was easily the best friend I have ever had. Around the time I turned 14, however, Seth began acting very odd. At first, I don't think my parents thought much of it. He was wearing black all the time and seemed like he was really depressed. Rather than hanging out with me or even his friends, he took to spending a lot of time alone in his bedroom. He obviously kept the lights off all of the time as well, because there were no lights coming from under the door. It may have seemed like typical 16-year-old boy sort of stuff, and that is likely why my parents didn't pay it any mind. But I was closer to Seth than they were. I knew him better than they did, and I knew that this was not typical teenage stuff. Hell, I was a teenager at the time, going through a lot of that myself. With Seth, it was something more. I would walk by his room at night, and I would hear him talking to someone. I never heard another voice, and I always chalked it up to the fact that he must have been talking on his cell phone. But the conversations were never pleasant. Whomever he was talking to, Seth was always at odds with that person. Whatever it was that was bothering my brother, he never told me. He never was angry with me either. He would say hello if I greeted him, and he always offered me a friendly, if not extremely worn-out smile. But rather than do anything else or say anything else to me, Seth would immediately go into his room, lock himself in there, and I wouldn't see him again for the rest of the day. After a couple of months of this behavior and no sign of stopping it, I was sitting at my computer doing some homework. I was having a difficult time with it, so I decided to take a break and chat with some friends on Yahoo Messenger. This was long before the days when Skype and Facebook were the norm. I got a message from an unknown user. I don't feel comfortable sharing the real name, so I will just call it Yahoo Stranger 1. This person sent me a message telling me, "If you don't keep far away from Seth, I'm going to kill you." At first, I was too alarmed to say anything, but after I composed myself, I messaged the person back. I told him that Seth was both my brother and my best friend, and I would hang out with him whenever I wanted. The person didn't respond. I kept sending him a message asking who he was, but he only responded, "You've been warned." I wanted to confront Seth about this, but he refused to talk about it. When I mentioned the message to him, there was a little bit of recognition in his eyes, but he just forced a very wary smile, tousled my hair, and told me there was nothing to worry about. He would take care of it. That was the very last time I ever saw my brother. The following day, he didn't come out of his room to go to school. I went up and knocked on his door at my mom's request, but he didn't answer. My parents tried to get him out of his room as well, but the door was locked and he didn't answer. My parents had to eventually pick the lock on the door, and when we went in, Seth wasn't there. What's more is that many of his things were gone, and there was a note on his bed that simply said, "Goodbye." My parents, of course, called the police and went through the whole missing child procedure. But it wasn't until I curiously turned on the monitor to Seth's computer that I got a little bit of information on what was going on. The very first thing I noticed was that Seth's Yahoo Messenger was up and there was an open conversation. The conversation was with my screen name, and Seth's screen name was Yahoo Stranger 1. It was him that had sent me that message. Seth had also left his cell phone behind. I suppose this was to keep our parents from being able to track him. Remember all those times I thought I heard him arguing on the phone with someone? He had no calls in his history other than from my parents. If he was arguing with someone, it was not on the phone. But the true scariness came from the fact that there was a long and detailed conversation on the Yahoo Messenger. It was between Yahoo Stranger 1 and the screen name that we knew was Seth's. The conversation was horrid. Yahoo Stranger 1 was telling Seth over and over again to hurt me. There were these grisly and disgusting things that the messenger was telling him to do, and Seth's responses were adamant that he loved me and he wasn't going to hurt me. There was a message that night, the one after I told Seth about what had happened, that was the scariest. Yahoo Stranger 1, who I assumed now was Seth, told Seth to kill me. Seth refused and argued with him and pleaded with Yahoo Stranger 1 to leave him alone. I could tell in the messages that the conversation was causing my brother a lot of pain. Trying to figure out how Seth could have been having an instant messenger conversation with himself, I looked at the timestamps of the messages, and each one was at least 5 minutes apart. He had the passwords saved on his messenger for both accounts. I figured he had to sign out and sign on both names repeatedly, answering the messages since Yahoo only allows you to send offline messages. I don't know if Seth is schizophrenic, or if he has dissociative identity disorder, or if Yahoo Stranger 1 really was a different person. But what I am sure of is that the constant threats against me were what was weighing heavy on my brother all those months. And I have no doubt that the reason my brother, my best friend, left was that he was afraid that he actually was going to hurt me. I keep hoping he'll come back one day. He's my brother, and I love him, and I could never be scared of him.
My older brother was one of those people who liked to scare me and my other siblings as much as possible. I couldn't really blame him for it because, although I didn't like being scared myself, I was just as guilty as trying to scare our younger brothers and sisters as well. But kids are allowed to be a little hypocritical, aren't we? The thing that always scared me the most was this big old house that my brother and I walked by every day on the way to and from school. The town we lived in didn't have bus service for any of the kids who lived in the town itself, so we had to walk to school. It was a good half an hour walk. The house that my brother always talked about was a really old Victorian that of course looked like it hadn't been kept up in decades. The lawn was completely dead and there was not anything but brown grass. An old dead tree was in the backyard with a decayed tire swing swaying from it. Old broken bicycles, tricycles, and other contraptions littered the backyard as well. There was an old rusty shed there too. There was never a car in the driveway, and we never saw anyone leaving or entering the place. But we knew that someone lived there because if you walked by in the evening, you could see blue lights shining from behind the curtains as if somebody was inside watching TV in the dark. Whenever the two of us walked by the house, my brother would always make strange comments about what was going on in there. I had to pretend like it didn't scare me, but I was only 12 years old at the time, and I was quite easily scared. He would tell me the man was a butcher who preyed on the little kids in the neighborhood who were stupid enough to walk up to his front door. My brother said the old man would grab the kid, take them out to his shed, hang them from their feet, and then lightly slice their skin open with a fine knife, and then slowly let them die as the blood trickled out into a tub that was under them. Growing up, every time he was in the mood to do it, my brother would dare me to go to the guy's door and break one of the old pots on it. I always declined because I told him I didn't want to get in trouble. He would then make fun of me for being a scaredy cat and taunt me for hours. On Halloween, the year that I turned 12, rather than going trick-or-treating, I was invited to hang out with my brother and his friends. They were doing what we at the time considered mature things. We egged some houses. We lit a flaming bag or two. It was a fun night. Late in the night, my brother and his friends decided to haze the new guy, being me. They dared me to go up to the old Victorian house and break one of the pots on the porch. As much as I wanted to be accepted by my brother and his friends, I did not want to do that. And they taunted me for it. And it was humiliating. But my fear was much stronger than the humiliation, and I continued to refuse to do it. When the taunting got really bad, I angrily blurted out to my brother, "Well, if you're so brave, why don't you go do it?" My brother hadn't expected that, and it worked perfectly because one of his buddies immediately turned to him and asked him that as well. Suddenly, all the attention was off of me, and it was turned to my brother. He was really taken off guard by the development. Still, my brother had to prove that he had the guts to do it. It was one thing for his little brother to be taunted, but he knew he could never live it down. So, acting all brave, although I could tell he was really scared, my brother walked up to the porch of the old building. You could tell he was scared out of his mind, but he didn't let it show. When he got up the steps, he grabbed an old flower pot and pulled it over his head. As he held the pot above him, proud of himself for what he was doing, I saw the door open behind him. A huge man walked up behind him as he was about to throw the pot. His buddies started screaming at my brother, telling him there was someone behind him. He just looked at us all like he didn't believe us. He just thought that they were trying to scare him. As he dropped the pot on the ground and it shattered, though, the guy grabbed my brother around the neck and held him there. My brother's chicken friends all ran off immediately. I couldn't do that, though. My brother had just been grabbed by a lunatic. I ran up to them before the guy could pull my brother into the house and tried to pull my brother away. The man swatted at me several times. He was huge, and he was choking the life out of my brother. Not knowing what else to do, I realized I had to take the cheapest shot possible. It was the only way I could help my brother. I kicked the guy square in the crotch. He groaned in shock, but he didn't let go of my brother. So I kicked him again. And again. I kicked this huge man a total of 6 times before he finally let go of my brother. Although my brother was wheezing and struggling to breathe, I knew we had to get away from the recently sterilized psychopath, and I pulled him away. It was difficult, but we were able to get out of his yard and down the street before he was able to do anything. Our parents called the police, but get this, they wouldn't do anything about it. My brother was not only trespassing, but he vandalized the guy's porch. We were all shocked and my parents were outraged, but the police did absolutely nothing. This man got away with it. Now, I'm the first one to admit what my brother did was wrong, but the guy was strangling him. Afterwards, my parents drove my brother and I to and from school every day. They figured it was best to avoid the guy as much as possible. The one good thing that came out of this was my brother had a lot more respect for me. It was at least 2 months before he began ragging on me again. But that's how brothers are.
Decided to put aside our fishing poles and go swimming in the creek. I really don't know how long we had been swimming when I noticed that our middle brother stopped doing anything and began staring off in the woods. Our oldest brother asked him what was wrong, and he just motioned to the woods. "There's someone out in the woods, watching us," he said. My first thought was that some pervert was out there watching us. But when I followed my brother's finger pointing out towards the woods, those thoughts quickly evaporated. Standing off in the trees was a huge man. It wasn't too dark that we couldn't make out some of his features. He was wearing jeans and a flannel shirt, which struck me as odd as it was pretty warm out. However, this was daunting because that was the side of the creek the guy was on. We slowly made our way over to our things. However, before we got to shore, an old hag came running out of the woods, shrieking like a freaking banshee. I got startled and fell back into the water, struggling until my middle brother pulled me back up again. The old nasty woman actually ran over to our things, our poles, and our clothes. She started grabbing the things and screaming, "Mine, mine, mine, mine!" She was gathering all of our things in her arms, dropping a few of them when she had too much in her arms.
"Yay! Stop that!"
my oldest brother yelled, and began to try and move faster to the shore. Growing up, my favorite thing in the world was going fishing with my two older brothers. We lived in a very rural area and would often hike out into the woods to go to various creeks to go fishing. We never really caught anything big in the creeks, but it wasn't as much about what we caught as much as it was about spending time with your brothers fishing. Stereotypically, we always got up way early in the morning on fishing day. We would begin hiking out to whichever creek we were going to and would watch the sun as it stole across the sky. It would be fully light outside as we got to where we were headed to. The scariest thing to ever happen on a fishing trip, of course, happened the first time that we had gotten at a baseball cap on his head that was sitting low over his face. But the most striking feature he had was that he was holding what looked to be a rifle or shotgun in his hand. We weren't sure what to do. Going into the woods, we knew that we were trespassing. We never actually knew whose property we were on, but we did know that the places that we hiked and fished on didn't belong to us. Except up until this point, we had never gotten caught before. Both of us younger boys looked at our brother for instruction as to what to do. He seemed just as worried as we did, though, and didn't give us any direction. He just kept looking at the man standing there and watched. My brother suggested we try and get ourselves over to our stuff, take it, and leave into a new creek. We had set out that morning, determined to go further into the hills than we normally did. We passed by one or two of our regular fishing spots and kept going deeper and deeper into the woods. We found an absolutely amazing spot. It was thickly wooded, but the creek was huge. It was beautiful and even had a fallen tree stretched out over it. After we determined that it was sturdy enough, the three of us made our way over to the other side of the creek. We sat our stuff out and began to fish. The day wore on, and we weren't really catching anything. The fishing got boring after a bit, so we decided to do something we normally didn't do. Like I said, the creek was huge and it was quite deep too, so we decided